Let me first say that trying to write something like this over Thanksgiving break was a mistake. My 90-year-old grandmother was actually going on her run as I was writing this. This run involved her shuffling around the kitchen and into the living room in a sort of Indy 500 loop at a breathtaking 2 miles an hour. Despite this, I pressed on and tried to ignore her huffing and puffing as she passed behind me every 45 seconds. I want to tell you guys 2 stories today. One is from a long time ago, and one from just a few weeks ago. If you remember a few weeks ago, you watched a video that talked about putting yourself in another's shoes, about being outside of yourself and thinking outside of yourself, about realizing that when you wait in that line at the grocery store, everyone else has issues there too. I want to talk about that. It's just not an easy thing to do, at all. But in hindsight, we can see just a little bit clearer. I sincerely hope you take these 2 stories to heart. Talk about them amongst each other, and honestly, take from this all you can. Because to me, these 2 stories strike extremely close to home. When I was 5 years old, I was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia, the cancer that seems to target kids ages 2 to 7. The fact that it is most common in kids already is a pretty depressing statistic. So what exactly is this kind of leukemia? I was debating going into the technical aspect here of what exactly is happening to the blood cells and bone marrow. No one really wants to hear that. Basically, I was a 95-year-old child. I couldn't walk, I couldn't eat what I wanted, I had no muscle whatsoever, I got pushed in a wheelchair, I was bald, I was taking medicine by a catheter that went straight into the front of my chest, and I was incredibly cranky. It really does sound like a 95-year-old. I had a very old neighbor growing up that used to watch out of her window and yell at us if we touched the grass with even 1 foot. As a child, I was definitely afraid I was turning into her. Also, just so everyone knows, at this time my grandmother finished her laps. So why do I bring up cancer? How exactly does this help us as we come back to school, looking forward to Christmas? Let's go back to our idea of thinking about others, being in other people's shoes. Having cancer, my perspective in the whole thing was very simplistic. I was scared, I was grumpy, and I was tired. I had literally hundreds of people checking on me every day, sticking, prodding, and questioning. I didn't have to do anything. My life was not incredibly difficult. I did not have to think about others. I just sat and laid there and let time pass. I cannot honestly begin to imagine being someone close to me at that time. It took until I was your guys' age to really begin to grasp that thought. Can you imagine if your best friend was diagnosed with cancer? A brother or sister? A parent? None of us want to imagine that. None of us can imagine that, or imagine having to deal with that. It is unquestionably harder to be the person on the outside, the one next to that kid, friend, or brother. I was selfish when I was in the hospital. I got all the attention. It simply was not possible for my older brother or older sister to get as much attention as I got. And I felt like I deserved the attention. I was sick. Why shouldn't the focus be entirely on me? Not once during those 3 years did I say, man, you know, I bet my family is taking this pretty hard. Not once. Even thinking about my future children having cancer and being a parent sounds infinitely more terrible than going through it myself. So how do you think my parents felt? Don't forget, we're thinking about this in other people's eyes and in other people's shoes. I'll tell you guys a quick story within this story. One of the primary medications I was taking during this time was called Decadron. On the side of the bottle where it lists possible side effects, they forgot to mention turns child into Hulk. After a long stint in the hospital, about 4 months without being home, I came home to my oldest sister holding a sign saying, "Welcome home, Nathan." Of course, Hulk version of me did not appreciate this. So what did I do? I ran up the stairs, ripped the sign in half, bit my sister, and ran into my room, naturally. Looking back, knowing the story ends happily, it's kind of funny. My sister and I laugh at it to this day. But can you imagine how she felt? Her baby brother was finally out of the hospital, having been there for 4 months. She wanted a normal life, of going to school every day, and a healthy brother. She did not want to be having Christmas next to a hospital bed, or have to see my parents cry on a regular basis. She thought that my coming home meant all that was over, and I came into the house screaming Hulk smash. So how do you rectify this? How do I fix this guilt trip I took when I was just starting my high school life? The only way I could think of was to stereotypically give back, to try to constantly think about others, be in others' shoes. Know the difficulties the person right next to you has could very easily make your troubles pale in comparison. This is not an easy task at all. When people ask me about my high school and college life, about playing different sports, they talk about how I made it to where I was despite my cancer. This is exactly the wrong way to think about it. I am who I am today, not despite the cancer, but because of it. Every single thing I learned about staying strong, not giving up, enjoying and loving every day of life came to me in those 3 years I was sick. And every single thing I know about caring for others, thinking about what someone else is going through, and being genuinely concerned about other people is because of those 3 years I was sick. I count it one of the best things that has ever happened to me, and I promise you I'm not joking. I found this poem the other day. It was actually quoted on the NFL Network. Those of you that know me well know that it is my favorite channel, First Place Fantasy Football. As I read this, I want you to think about how true it is. It's by Robert Browning Hamilton. I walked a mile with pleasure. She chatted all the way, but left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and narrow words, said she, but oh, the things I learned from her when sorrow walked with me. I learned so much in those 3 years with cancer, and it has given me a perspective on life that many people are jealous of. I was lucky enough to be put into remission when I was 9 years old. By the time I turned 17, I was completely free and stopped going to regular checkups. It was a 12-year adventure. So now I want to bring up the second story I have for you today, which is something that happened very recently. About 3 months ago, I was sitting up on the 3rd floor of Maine, getting ready for what I expected to be an awesome start to my new life. It was the night before the first day of school, the day when we all come together and start this tough journey together. It was about 7 o'clock at night, and I decided to give my dad a call. My mother picks up and says very quickly, "Daddy's having a heart attack. I have to go." Wow. Not what I was expecting. As calmly as I could, I waited. I waited for about 10 minutes before I called back. The ambulance was on its way. My mom gave him the phone, and he said, "I love you, me." My mom said she would call me as soon as she knew anything, and asked me to call my siblings. I spent the next 30 minutes calling my 2 sisters and brother, trying to explain what I knew, which was very, very little. I waited. I talked continually to my 2 best friends, trying to just talk to someone without wanting to be a bother. I waited some more. My mom called me back. He was in the hospital, in the operating room. There was no update more than that. I emailed Mr. McCrisky and Mr. Smith. I actually still have the email right here, and I want to read it to you so you can get an idea what it was like. "Hi, Ronan and Toad. I'm really sorry to be emailing you this. I just called my dad, and my mom picked up. He's in the middle of having a heart attack. Last I heard, he was in the hospital with the surgeons attempting to clear the artery. I don't know what is happening, but please keep him in your thoughts and prayers. I don't know if I'm going to have to go home, but I wanted to give you a heads up on what was happening. Thanks." It was all I could think of to say. It was the day before my first day teaching at this wonderful school, and teaching was pretty much the last thing on my mind. Within just a few minutes, Mr. McCrisky emailed me back saying, "One of the strengths of our community is our ability to cover for each other when we need to be with our families. Do what you need to do for your family." I continued to wait, not really knowing what to do. About 45 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. It was Reverend Hall. He didn't know what was going on, just that something was wrong, and he came up to talk about it. It was a huge blessing to me. I honestly cannot describe how helpful that was. After what seemed like an eternity, I got a call from my mom. Still very upset, but she said it was going to be fine. I had a 1-minute conversation with my dad and attempted to get some sleep. I bring this up to you to give a few very real examples about thinking about others. Mr. McCrisky, taking time out of his night, a busy night before the first day of school, to let me know to not worry, to focus on my family, when his family was actually going through their own struggles. Mr. Smith, who sent me an email saying, "Just heard about your father. I stand ready to support in any way I can." And Reverend Hall, who also new to the school, had a huge first day coming up, came all the way up to Main Building just to check on a fellow teacher. Not 12 hours later, all 4 of us were teaching in front of you guys. Not a single one of you knew that my father had almost died 12 hours earlier. Not a single one of you knew the kindness of these 3 teachers. And others that night. I would argue that most of you were focused on your first day of school and getting your classes. The thing about these tough times is that no one knows when they will happen, and the first day of school is the same as any other to disease or sickness. Christmas allows us to focus on this just a little bit more than normal. As the weather gets colder, the snow begins to fall, and our attention turns to more vacation and fun. Take a moment to use these examples I've given you to take a step back. Look around, see what the world looks like through someone else's eyes. The person sitting right next to you could have just come from home where a younger sibling was diagnosed with leukemia, or where a parent just had a life-threatening encounter, or a million other things. During this season, let's not be so selfish to think that we are the center of the world. Step out of your comfort zone and be the helping hand or caring shoulder when you can. That person who needs a shoulder may be sitting right next to you, and I promise they will always remember the kindness you showed. Thank you.